Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 2 of season 4 of Babylon 5. Whatever happened to Mr. Garibaldi? We are 9 days after Zahadum. Franklin records a log noting the breakup of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds and the anticipation of a final strike by the Shadows, and a feeling of loss at what to do next. Lanier enters and tells him that there is a problem with Delenn. Elsewhere, tendrils of energy hold Sheridan, and a voice asks over and over, "Who are you? What do you want? Who are you? What do you want?" Sheridan awakes on the floor of the cavern we saw him in at the end of the last episode. His alien companion notes that he was dreaming, but that there is no escape from Zahadum. When Sheridan says it's his duty to escape, his companion asks if he would try and escape if he were a prisoner of love. He thinks Sheridan is still upset that he hasn't told him his name. He says it's Lorien, but that gets Sheridan nowhere. Words have meaning, names have power. The universe began with a word. But words need thought, and thoughts need words, so which came first? Lorien sighs as Sheridan is clearly preoccupied, and asks him who he is. Sheridan is surprised he knew what was happening in his dream. Lorien acknowledges it's a difficult question to answer. Then he hits Sheridan with another issue. He's dead. He's been down there 9 days, but isn't thirsty, isn't hungry, and on searching for one, can find no pulse. Tricky. Tick, tock. This is where we get a little Twilight Zone-y, as Lorien asks Sheridan what he remembers. Falling, yes. Landing, no. So perhaps, Lorien suggests, he is in between moments. Tick, he lives. Tock, he hits bottom. We all have a finite number of seconds, but here, in this place, they have all the time in the world. And having accosted Lorien, Sheridan flashes back to the energy tendrils, and Lorien senses he is closer to Tick, or Tock. On an unnamed planet, Jakar is quizzing a junk dealer about a star fury he just happened across in Sector 87. It could well be Mr. Garibaldi's, and of course space is an awfully big place to just happen across an abandoned star fury. When the bar owner objects to Jakar's line of questioning, trouble is clearly going to ensue. When Marcus joins the fray, and the two make themselves scarce, but the owner speaks to a Centauri guard after they've gone. Back on the station, Franklin gently confronts Delenn about her extreme fasting over her grief, noting that whilst a full Minbari may be able to go 7 days without food or drink, she isn't one anymore, and may be doing herself harm at this point. Marcus has apparently followed Jakar on the basis that if he was hunting Mr. Garibaldi because he was in trouble, then Jakar was about to get into trouble himself. Jakar is being hunted, but Marcus can move about freely, and both are aware that the situation is precarious, but Jakar explains he never had a friend who wasn't a Narn before Garibaldi, and Marcus notes that he's never had a friend who was a Narn, and not many others that are left alive. Jakar likes his pike, and the bartender likes the sound of the reward that's mentioned when he identifies Jakar from the mugshots he's being shown. Meanwhile, Marcus is applying a little water torture to the situation, in a bid to get more information. On the station, Franklin is tidying up Sheridan's effects, and has found a data crystal he thinks Delenn should see. In the personal log, he recounts how breaking away from Earth has been like falling off a cliff, in which situation his dad said you might as well try and fly as you have nothing to lose. And he says he feels the same way about Delenn, that he never intended to fall in love with her, but once his heart crossed that line, there was nothing else he could do but see it through, and try to fly. Her spirits are clearly lifted, as only Mira could show solely with her facial expression. On the unnamed world, Marcus wants to stay with Jakar, having discovered that an IPX contact gave the salvage dealer the coordinates for 10% of his take, and a name, Montague. Jakar wants Marcus to go back to the station to use its resources to track this lead down, but he wants to stay to protect Jakar. Jakar assures him that he can look after himself, and there are few things as inherently dangerous as an offended Narn. This is a personal mission for him, and he will see it through alone, regardless of the quality of the company on offer. So Marcus leaves in his shuttle as Jakar gets some rest, which doesn't last long. The Centauri have gathered themselves, and whilst Jakar is able to offer some resistance, their numbers ultimately overwhelm him, and he goes down. At the station, a white star comes through the gate, followed by a lot more. Like, all of them. Delenn has resolved to take the fight to Z'ha'dum itself, with whatever members of the League will still join them. In 7 days, she offers the assembled captains the chance to jump off the mountain and fly, in the hope that even in falling, they will show others the way. On Centauri Prime, Londo grabs a knife in response to incessant hammering on his door in the middle of the night. He is being summoned to Cartagia's presence as a matter of urgency. There then comes little verbal fencing between Cartagia and Londo due to his tardiness, but this is resolved, and Cartagia presents him with a gift, a shackled Jakar, last of the Kari. Apparently when he is no longer amusing, he will be disposed of. Londo, stunned, thanks Cartagia, but far from convincingly. Cartagia asks Jakar if he has anything to say, prompting him to ask Cartagia if he knows where Mr. Garibaldi is. Then we find out, but not from Cartagia. We suddenly see an edgy Garibaldi pacing around a featureless, low-ceilinged room with a single chair, pounding on the door to get out as a monotone voice tells him not to hurt himself. When he apparently answers their questions about what happened after he left Babylon 5 untruthfully, he wrecks the chair and starts taking his anger out on the light fittings, prompting a gas attack that drops him. A figure in black with a breather enters the room and stands over him. Back on Centauri Prime, Londo enters Jakar's cell. Londo is genuinely sad to see him here, because he doesn't understand why he left the sanctuary of the station. Had he wanted to die, Londo could have arranged it, and it would have been dignified. Here, there is no chance of that. Londo goes on to explain just how good Centauri are at prolonging suffering, not to scare him, but to explain why he is saddened, because at no point would what Cartagia was going to do have given him pleasure personally. However, he confides in Jakar that a monster is on the throne, and Jakar could be critical to unseating him. But until he can move, Jakar must endure. Londo cannot simply free him. Jakar does not respond immediately, but as Londo is about to leave, he notes that he didn't ask for his price. In order to have his help, Londo must remove the monster from his world and free Narn. Londo gives him his word. On Z'ha'dum, Sheridan is back where he started, and Lorien agrees we all come full circle, and says Sheridan needs us to surrender to Tok. Yes, he says he is saddened that his children are fighting when Sheridan knows that there's a war he has to get back to. This puzzles Sheridan, the reference to his children. Lorien reveals that he was old when the earth was forming. Sheridan asks if he was one of the first ones, and he counters by saying he is the first one. This is the first time anyone has made it this far in a very long time. The shadows keep coming back to Z'ha'dum out of respect for his presence, but he says they have lost track of the reason for his being there over the years. Sheridan recognises him as the energy being he's been seeing in his dreams, which Lorien guardedly acknowledges, and asks him if he knows he has a piece of a Vorlon in him. Sheridan says he does, naming Kosh, and Lorien says he met it once. He notes that they can break pieces of themselves off to be carried in other organisms as their eyes and ears. He also notes that he cannot create life, but can breathe on the embers of what remains. He says Kosh is part of the problem. Both he and Sheridan are clinging to life when they need to go the other way. They need to embrace life rather than fleeing from death, and as Sheridan gets closer to Tok, Lorien asks if he has anything worth living for, to answer the question of why he is. And his final thoughts are of falling away from the White Star, and Delenn saying she will catch him if he falls. The episode closes on Lorien standing over an unconscious Sheridan. So, interesting episode with an unexpected gut punch, because we know even at this point that Cartagia is a deeply disturbed individual with no qualms about removing heads from bodies. So Jakar utterly at his mercy on Centauri Prime, of all places, is one hell of a twist. And Marcus might have been able to help him tackle those guards had he not been so overconfident in his own abilities. We're never really told what the planet is, but we see a variety of species in the town, so I'm guessing it's like a B5 version of Mos Eisley, a typical backwater starport where the major races maintain some sort of presence but don't get in each other's way. Which is interesting in and of itself because we haven't really been on the ground anywhere that isn't a capital planet at this point. Now it's apparent that there are indeed small-scale free traders bouncing around who aren't particularly allied with anyone as such. Could have made for an interesting open universe game, eh? Marcus going after Jakar is a nice touch, because Jakar is going alone as the last member of the Kari, and that was incredibly risky, let's face it, even for Jakar. You can see the two of them doing really well together, so it's a shame when Jakar returns to being solo, and you do wonder why he felt it was safe to do so. You might think that Londo doesn't need to freak him out with the live vivisection description he gives in the cell, but Jakar isn't an idiot, and I think Londo is just trying to make it perfectly clear to him that he has zero hope unless he goes along with what Londo is suggesting. Which ironically is also a bloody stupid thing for Londo to do. The cell might not have any recording devices, but Carthage is bound to have telepaths, and is clearly highly likely to torture Jakar. So Jakar knowing of an assassination plot by Londo right now is probably not the best idea, but of course it establishes that even now Jakar will fight for his world, no matter the personal cost, although if I were him I'd be questioning Londo's commitment in this situation. And this is just how far their relationship has come, from the Narn being in the Ascendants and Londo being under Jakar's heel at the start of Season 1. As I say, it's an incredibly fast resolution of Jakar's quest to find Mr. Garibaldi, and not in a good way, but it does make you wonder how dark things are going to get. And speaking of Garibaldi, well, he's alive, assuming the gas hasn't killed him by the end of the brief glimpse we see of him. He's clearly frustrated out of his mind and is being quizzed about what he remembers hard for reasons that are as mysterious and frustrating to us as they are to him. So clearly he's being held against his will and his captors appear human, but that doesn't rule out Shadow involvement any more than it rules anyone else in, so let's park that one. Franklin's point about Delenne's change is well made, but Delenne, like John, is not ready to shift her perspective right away. You have to wonder how many logs Franklin hunted through to find just the right one to give her a nudge out of her grief and back onto mission as Ranger 1. Lots of nice detail here I didn't recall, but as is always the way, you can see the way the shots are done maturing over time, and this piece with just Delenne and recorded Sheridan is reminiscent of his message to her as he goes to Zahadum. As to whether her plan is wise, well, that we'll have to wait and see. I'm not sure, incidentally, that the way in which the White Stars come whizzing in through the local jump gate quite works. It's almost treating them as fighters rather than cruisers. You need to slow them down a touch. It's like they're on military thrust or something. I get they're trying to give the impression of numbers arriving all at once, but I guess this is the downside of being able to do huge numbers of CGI ships with little effort. Finally, Lorien and Sheridan. It might just be the time of day, but it's an interesting relationship, because if Lorien is indeed what he says he is, then why would he choose to voluntarily stay in a pit on Zahadum? Like Sheridan says, he must have a way out, but I think that in part, nothing we see here can be taken at face value, because Lorien could be doing a gentler form of inquisition in a sort of virtual space while he holds Sheridan's body in the pit in the real world. Just. I guess that like Morden, or Sheridan hit the walls on the way down, Lorien has to decide whether he has enough inner strength not to fly so much as to let go and in so doing rise. Whether or not he's managed this is not really clear at the end of the episode, but we know that he has a reason to come back, Delenne, and that could tip the balance. Also, we hope. So, we're still in a countdown away from last season's finale at this point, and this episode gives us lots more talking points for what might be to come, but as I mentioned last episode, if you weren't on board already, then you'd better be looking at midwinter.com hard to try and catch up at this point. And personally, I'm fine with that. You can't keep expositioning a storyline this long. Either you're reading the book or you're not, you know? You have to accept you're at cruising speed at this point and go with it. I just did a video looking back at my convention experiences due to an unexpected find, so do go and have a look at that if you're interested. It's in this playlist. Cheers for now. See you for the next one.